Dmytro, 38 years old, technical support, city of Donetsk.
January 2022. Answers were provided in Russian. What was your summer like in 2014? What prompted you to leave or stay?
It all started in the spring of 2014. My family had recently opened our own business, a small cafe. Started working, and then the referendum happened. The city was blocked with checkpoints, barricades were erected, and protests were held, etc. Our cafe was located near the Donetsk Military Lyceum, and across from it was a military unit. Sometime in early May, we heard gunfire in that area and thought it was just training, but it turned out to be worse. Signs of future trouble. A week later, coming back home from work, we saw a checkpoint at the entrance to the building. It turned out that one of the well-known Donetsk battalions had occupied the former Children's Hospital building, and it was just 500 meters from our house. We lived in the private sector of Kievsky district, about 10 kilometers from the airport. The city lived in tension, and the future development of events was unclear. From the end of May, the airport started getting bombed, and planes circled for the next strike right over our building. In June, my acquaintances started leaving, and we decided to leave the city for a while, as the government on TV promised that it would last a maximum of a few months, and for some reason, we believed them. Somewhere at the end of June, we took a day off. It was early, around 4 or 5 in the morning. I woke up from gunfire near the house. Automatic bursts were getting closer and closer. Probably soldiers were looking for someone. It's hard to imagine that they were just shooting and walking around the yards. At one moment, I saw a person with a gun and a balaclava outside the bedroom window. I heard the entrance door open, heard footsteps first in the kitchen, then in the hall. The only thing separating us was the door to the bedroom. On one side, I was with my sleeping wife, and on the other, the one who wanted to hear some noise and act accordingly. Adrenaline was rushing in my ears, and there was only one thought in my head. Let the little one not wake up now, or it won't be good for us. I had never breathed so quietly, but everything turned out fine. The person from the other side of the door stood for a while, then, not getting what he wanted, started to leave. Went back to the kitchen, looked in the fridge, and left. I lay for about 5 minutes, then went out into the yard and found our shepherd, who had huddled in the booth and was afraid to stick her nose out. Around this time, the future godfather of my child asked me for shelter. He lived in Ploshchatka, a micro-district in the Kuibishevsky district of the city. That's when they started bombing there because there was a new bus station, Zahidny, built for Euro 2012. It was calmer for us at that time. At the end of June, we left for Crimea, which had already been annexed at that time. We stood at the customs for 12 hours and finally reached our destination. We stayed there for 2 weeks and started getting ready to go back home. We only reached Dnipropetrovsk region when my mother-in-law called and said there was nothing for us to do at home. Luckily, my wife's Zhenya, grandmother, lived there. So we stayed there. The waiting for the unknown began. There was no work in the village, and money was running out. 3 days after arriving at my grandmother's, my classmate, who was involved in construction and lived in Feodosia, called me. Our conversation went like this. "Have you already left Crimea?" "Yes." "Too bad. I wanted to offer you a job." "Well, offer it. When should I come?" "We need to wait a bit until we get a project. I'll call you." 2 weeks of waiting finally led to the long-awaited call. During this time, I was beaten several times by the locals. The reason was that my car had Donetsk plates, and I spoke proper Ukrainian. Later, it turned out that they had mistaken me for someone else, but the fact remained. And here it was, salvation. I said I wouldn't go without my wife, so the two of us set off. In Feodosia, I worked in construction, and Zhenya took care of my classmates' children. Time passed until Zhenya was offered a job in Kyiv. She left in October. I finished the last project, thanked my friend for help and shelter, and in early December went to Kharkiv. There, I had to pick up my father and drive home to Donetsk. In a few days in Kharkiv, local artists managed to vandalize my car, claiming I was a terrorist and the car was a bomb. They deflated the tires. On the way back with my father, we got into an accident and got stuck in Kharkiv for another 2 weeks, but that's another story about car service and people's ability to earn. We made it from Donetsk without any special events and adventures, only at a checkpoint. They threatened to shoot us next time if we came with headlights on. However, on the way from Donetsk to Kyiv, I was offered weapons, drugs, and currency. At each checkpoint in the DNR territory, I was stopped for document checks and to clarify the reason for visiting Ukraine because the car had Donetsk plates. Every time during the inspection, they dismantled the car down to the last screw. Before New Year, I arrived in Kyiv. After the holidays, I started looking for a job. I searched for 9 months, going through regular interviews, group interviews, multi-level interviews. But when it came to document processing, everything fell apart. The Donetsk registration in my passport, like a dreaded stamp, prevented me from doing anything.
Is there a story of yours or your close ones that you would like to share? What struck you the most?
In the summer of 2015, I was accused of terrorism and recruiting people for terrorist organizations. This is how it happened. My wife and I were sitting in a cafe, and I was talking on the phone with a friend who stayed in Donetsk. He was planning to get a job at the Donetsk pre-trial detention center. We discussed the medical examination and other details of joining law enforcement. There was a couple sitting at the next table, about 15 years older than us. They overheard some phrases taken out of context, such as pass a medical examination and get a uniform. They called the police. A young girl and a guy arrived on the call, asked me to finish the conversation and go with them. I asked them to specify the reason for their visit, and here I was shocked. You are suspected of aiding terrorism and recruiting people for terrorist organizations. Show your documents. My wife started crying, and when the policewoman found out where we were from, the situation changed. The young lieutenant took Zhenya aside and tried to calm her down while I remained in the cafe with the second member of the police crew. Do I look like a terrorist? I don't know. I've never seen them. Who called you? That couple at the next table. We talked to this couple and found out they simply misunderstood us. I don't blame them. People were vigilant. But drawing conclusions based on snippets of phrases is wrong. It calmed down a bit after some time, and I found my first job. 7 years have passed since then. During this time, my car was dismantled by some inventors twice, almost once in the yard of the district police department. It was about 150 meters from the car to it. I wrote a statement about it twice, but there were no results. The second time, the patrol did not even come to inspect the crime scene. I don't know what it's connected with, but I want to believe it's not about my birthplace. The vehicle had Donetsk plates.
How did the year 2014 change your life?
The year 2014 dramatically changed my life. There were long-term plans for the future, ideas for further development, and it so happened that everything collapsed in one moment. I had to radically change my entire life path and practically start all over again. The events of those years revealed many relationships between people. Friendships strengthened, while some individuals simply disappeared from the communication horizon.
If you had the chance to go back to 2014, would you do something differently? If yes, what specifically?
If I were to go to that time, I would do the same. The children were very young, and they didn't need to live in the conditions of war, witness all these events, and experience all these negative emotions. Not for a second do I regret the decisions made back then.
How do you feel about your life now? Do you have any regrets?
Now, I am a simple employee of the company. In reality, I am very sorry that life turned out this way. However, the events that have occurred in my life have made me more resilient, but also tougher.
Do you plan your future? If yes, for what term?
The desire to plan for the future on a long-term basis exists, but as long as there is no stability and financial independence, there is no planning.
January 2024. Answers were provided in Ukrainian. On January 24, 2022, a full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia began. What was this day like for you? What were your feelings, and how did you react?
On February 24, my morning started around 5. My uncle from Kharkiv called me saying, "It started. The war has begun." And somewhere in the distance, I heard the long, forgotten sounds of shell explosions. The only thought echoing in my head was, again? Really? A little later, the whole family woke up. We taped the windows with tape as we did in Donetsk, and just in case, covered them with curtains for some protection against glass fragments. At the time of the invasion, my younger daughter was 6 years old, and she made a bunker for herself in the closet, building Lego guns for the armed forces of Ukraine.
What motivated you to stay in Ukraine? How were these 2 years of full-scale Russian invasion in Ukraine for you? What is your current emotional state?
When the question of leaving Kyiv or the country arose, we decided to stay put. We've already fled from the war once, and it found us again. So, we'll face it here, overcome it, and then live in our own free country. This was the decision made in the first days of the war. In the first few days, products disappeared from the stores, so my mornings began with exploring the entire neighborhood in search of any stores where I could buy something. And each time, I had to stand in a long queue. In most cases, it was a futile waste of time. During these moments, I was constantly in touch with my wife because battles with artillery and gunfire were taking place near us. I had to know that everything was fine with my family. The company where I held my position wasn't working either. However, they immediately paid us a month's salary in advance, which helped us a lot in the very beginning.
What changes and transformations have occurred with you, if any, as a person during these 2 years of full-scale invasion?
Regarding the transformation of myself as a person, I can say that overall, nothing significant has happened. I just became sadder due to former friends who, since 2014, began to consider us nationalists and wanted to prove that we all needed saving. Love for our motherland is not Nazism or fascism, but not everyone understands that. And again, the war revealed the true faces of people with whom we used to communicate.
If you could go back to 2014, would you do anything differently?
If I were to go back to that time, I would do the same.
Do you plan your future? If yes, for what term? How do you envision the future of Ukraine?
As for planning the future, I can say that, like in 2014, 2015, I cannot plan for any extended period. After shells hit within 500 to 800 meters from our home, you understand that every day could be the last. But the belief in our unbroken spirit, the armed forces of Ukraine, and air defense inspires faith that Ukraine will be free, independent, and a magical country because extraordinary people live in it. At the time of recording this story, Dmytro has joined the Ukrainian military.